All right, guys, we're going to do something a little different today. We're going to be doing an Old Testament study. As a matter of fact, I've been kind of thinking about whether or not we want to walk through the Bible as a whole, because here's one of the problems that I've noticed among people. People want to start reading the Bible just anywhere in the scriptures, and somehow they think that you can just pick up the Bible, start reading it anywhere, and somehow you want to understand what the Bible is trying to say, or what God, who is speaking through his word, is trying to say. And that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Can you pick up any book anywhere and just start reading and have an understanding of what the story that the author is trying to give, or the point that he's trying to make? So it's a ridiculous idea to think that you can just simply pick up the Bible in Matthew, because that's where we love to start in the New Testament, Matthew, and we understand what in the world is going on. That is impossible, and to be honest with you, is nonsensical. You can't pick up the Bible anywhere and make sense of the Bible. So I don't know. I kind of been wondering and kind of thinking to myself whether or not I want to start a series of lectures, and literally starting from Genesis chapter 1. And if it takes us 1,000 years, and it would take us 1,000 years to be honest about it, but if it took 1,000 years to just simply work through all of the scriptures, and the reason why is because in order to understand, especially the New Testament, forget about Revelation, but especially when you get to the New Testament, you got to understand how the story begins. And that just simply makes sense. So I don't know, give me a shout out if you are interested in me starting from Genesis 1:1 and explain. And of course, guys, now this is kind of going to be an we're going to look at it from a more broader perspective, because we can't get we can't look intensely into every verse of scripture, but there will be some passages that if we did decide to do this, I would have to, and it would be for your benefit to look at it intensely. But anyway, just give me a shout out if you'd be interested in that. So let me get to the point for the video today. All right, I'm going to look at Romans 8 and verse 28. You've heard me talk about it many times, so I want to look at this particular verse. And what I want to do is give you an example from scripture to show you the truth, or the truths that can be derived from this principle. In other words, let me say it this way. And guys, if you don't mind, I'm going to take my time on it. A lot of times when the Apostle Paul, you got to remember, the Apostle Paul was a Jewish scholar. Okay, Paul was not just your ordinary Jew, and like say for instance Peter, James, and John. Now they were acquainted with the scriptures, because all Jewish boys, basically from the age of about 5 years old, they were trained in the scriptures. So there's no big deal. They were not trained as scholars in the scriptures, but they were taught the scriptures as children. So they had a familiarity with the scriptures. All right. But nevertheless, the Apostle Paul was different. He was not just simply as a normal Jewish boy taught in the scriptures, but Paul himself was a Jewish rabbi. Remember, Paul said he was taught at the feet of Gamaliel. And we know Gamaliel was one of the chief rabbis at his particular time. And Paul had one of the acclaims of his as the student of Gamaliel. So therefore, we know that Paul himself was a scholar of the scriptures. And so my point is, and as a scholar of the scriptures, remember that when you say of the scriptures, we mean the Old Testament scriptures, because the New Testament scriptures was being written, breathed out by God through the apostles and through the legates of the apostles. The legate simply, when I say a legate of the apostle, I'm simply talking about a person who had the authority of the apostle, or The apostle had to say, okay, whatever you're writing, all right, he's checking it off. In other words, let me give you an example because I'm starting to babble. Mark was a legate of the apostle Peter. Luke was a legate of the apostle Paul. You got it? So they had to authorize the writings. That's why the book of Mark, the Gospel of Mark, is considered to be authoritative. Why? Because it has the authority of the apostle Peter. And Luke and Acts, written by the same guy, Luke and Acts, is considered authoritative. Why? Because it was written by, because it was by the apostle Paul, and Luke wasn't a companion of the apostle Paul. But anyway, the point is, Paul had to study the Old Testament scriptures. And so in Paul's writing, you will see it begin to effervesce in his writings, the whole teachings of the Old Testament scriptures. So let me just get to the point, because I babble. And you know what, guys, you have to forgive me for the babbling, because one of the reasons why I kind of do the babbling thing is because I hate to say things and assume that people have an understanding and they really don't. And then sometimes you find out people think they do and they don't. Or I like to make sure that people understand the scriptures. And that's kind of one of the reasons why I'll go on and on with the explanation, because you really need to understand it. And it takes a lot of time and a lot of reading to understand it. But let me get to my point. Okay? All right. And I don't know how long this is going to be. I decided to take my time with it. So in Romans 8:28, now that's the verse that we're going to deal with from the Apostle Paul in the book of Romans. And as I was simply saying, was a lot of times when Paul writes these things, because he was a Jewish scholar, very comfortable and knowledgeable of the Old Testament, God using him to write the scriptures, as we have in Romans 8:28. We're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it. God using him, Paul a lot of times would have in the back of his mind how God dealt with the elect people, and that's the Jewish people. How God dealt with the elect people many times in the Old Testament scriptures. Okay, and we're going to do that same thing. And that's what I think Paul is doing here. Not so much with this particular example, but I'm going to use this example as I try to do my little Pauline thing. I'm going to use this example to teach you something, I hope, and also to give you some enlightenment. So let's just go on to it. Enough time has been wasted. Romans 8:28. And what the Apostle Paul said, what? And we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love God. Notice, God causes it. You know what I love more than anything, guys? What I like about the scriptures is, always remember, every word of scripture is God breathed. And it has its importance. Now, some things are more important than others. But when we get to certain passages like a principle teaching, and this is basically what you have, it's in one verse. In a one verse statement, Romans 8:28, there is a wonderful, grand principle teaching that the Apostle Paul is doing. And what he says is, notice, one of the key words is God causes all things to work together. And that's the thing that I want you to see. These things didn't just happen, but it was God who was what? Causing these things to work together this way. And that is the manifold working of things. And so here's the point, and kind of let me get to it prematurely. And the reason why is so that it'll make sense more to you as we work on. God causes all things to work together. So that means that in the life of the believer, God is working things together. And that's what when we use that term providential. That simply means the activity of God, how God is working in the lives of a believer. It could be a person, or it could collectively be a group. And that's what we're going to see too, collectively. But the whole point is, God, when you can't see it, when you don't realize or even know that it is happening, God is working to make things happen for the good. Now, the good, and I got to hit this point, the good is never determined by you. The good is not what you want. The good is not even, and hear me now, as I'm thinking, I already got in mind where I want to go. The good is not about what feels good. The good has to do with the determined will of God. In other words, what is it that God wants to do with your life or with the life of a group of people? That's the good, the intended will of God. So he makes everything work according to the good, that intended will of God. And notice then at the end of the verse, let me just simply say, for what? To those who are called according to his purpose. Now I was reading, I'm usually always reading NASB. It's one of the best translations that we have of the Bible. But anyway, when it says to those who love, those who are called according to his purpose. Again, here's another one of those nuggets, to his purpose. See, notice what it is. They are called to fulfill what? The purpose of God. That goes back to that statement that I was just telling you guys. It's not what we want, and that's one of the things. You know, I've been saved since I was about 22 years old, and it didn't come easy for me, and it didn't come through just simply reading the Bible. Now that helps big time, reading and understanding the scriptures. But there was a certain experience that God just simply had to work in my life, as he'll have to do the same thing for you. The purpose of God, sometimes we don't know it, sometimes we don't understand, and rarely do we know it, to be honest with you. But you have to learn to yield to the purpose of God. And yielding to the purpose of God simply means that we have to always be willing for God to do what is necessary for him, for us in our life, in order that his purpose may be attained. In other words, being saved is not always getting what you want. Being saved is not about having what you want. It's about God has saved you for what reason? So that you may fulfill the purpose that God has designed for your life. And again, sometimes it doesn't feel good. That's my whole point. We know that all things work together. But nevertheless, God providentially, he continues to work in our lives to fulfill the purpose that he has set for us. You got it? And all of this is unto, and let me just quit all that theological talking. All of this is to the working of our salvation, so that we'll be in heaven when it's all said and done. That's the bottom line. But anyway, now let's get back to the teaching, because I don't want to cheat you of this. So the whole principle that I was talking about was what? How God is working everything for the good of the believer. All right. So now here's the lesson that I want to give to you. All right. And notice I got my Bible today. So, and I'm kind of trying to keep an eye on the time, guys, because this crazy thing cuts off in like 30 minutes. I want to go to Genesis chapter 38. Okay. And I like that. And the reason I like Genesis chapter 38. I've read a lot of commentaries and things of that nature, and then people talk about how the scripture is, Moses, organized the scripture, Genesis through Deuteronomy. The first 5 books were organized by Moses. All right. Now we understand. Now, I don't want to do all of that. Maybe guys, if we do the study on the book of Genesis, maybe I'll do that for you if you guys wanted to. But as Moses collected the materials for the book of Genesis, because here's the whole point, Moses really didn't start writing till the book of Exodus. And so they get to this particular part in chapter 38. And when they get to chapter 38, a lot of people say, well, it really doesn't make any sense. Chapter 38, the way that we see things working, we kind of see genealogically how things are working, and we're dealing with the descendants of Abraham, and then Isaac, and then Jacob. Then we deal with the issue of Jacob's sons. Jacob has these sons by these two women. And then we start dealing with the issue of the birth of Joseph in chapter 37. Now, I guess I'll stop there. Because I'm trying to deal with the issue. Notice, it is a beautiful concept, how God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love the Lord. That's the Romans 8:28. And in Genesis 37, we see the birth of Joseph, and we see the jealousy that Joseph's brothers has for him. And they get so jealous, and we know the bottom line is they sell Joseph off into slavery, and Joseph is sold into slavery in Egypt, right? And so what do you do when you look at that? It's a beautiful concept. You feel bad. You say, well, it's a bad thing that Joseph's brothers did him that way. And it's really sad how they sold their brother and they mistreated their brother. But here's what I want you to see. Remember when I said to you, God's providential hand, how God is all, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay, let me slow it down. I may have to do this a different way. If I do, fine. If I don't, fine. I don't even know. Let's just play it by ear. You feel bad when you look at what happened to Joseph and how he was mistreated by his brothers. And it was an evil thing that his brothers did to him. But what you have to keep in mind, see, there's a certain motion that's moving all throughout the book of Genesis, and you have to kind of stand off from the book to get an understanding of what's going on. And this is what I'm trying to teach you today. So it's bad. That's not what I'm trying to do. So I'm trying to make it clear to you. Don't remove that what they did is a bad thing. It is a bad thing. But what I want you to see is this. Nevertheless, God is working in the bad thing. That's why at the very end, once Joseph is revealed to his brothers, and they are afraid that Joseph is going to become angry and excite some sort of punishment on them because of what they did. And Joseph said, don't worry about it. Don't be angry with yourself. Notice what he said. And this is what I'm teaching you. Joseph said, you intended evil towards me. And that's the point. You can't make them not guilty. That's so you'll see it. You intended evil, but God meant it for good. That's it. That's the providential hand of God. You got it? But even in the providential hand of God, what I was telling you about, now notice something. It didn't take away from the fact that as a young boy, Joseph was thrown in a pit. He was sold to Ishmaelite traders. He was sold into Potiphar's house, into Egypt. He was later falsely convicted of a crime. He was put in jail. Notice, it was a lot of bad stuff happened to Joseph. And all of that was done by the determined will of God. Can't you hear the verse again? All things work together for the good. It didn't feel good to Joseph. He suffered. He went through a whole lot. But notice, it was for the good of the children of Israel. Because remember, I don't even have time. Remember when the famine hit? And once the famine hit and they ran out of food, they had to do what? Send the brothers to Egypt. And what did God do? God had already provided. Why? He sent Joseph to Egypt, and God raised him to power so that when his brothers came to Egypt, God could do what? He could provide for the sons of Jacob. You got it? he did it for their good. Now that's one level, that's one envelope. You know what? I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you there. That's one level. All right, notice, and you can see clearly, can't you, how God is doing things for their good. And again, guess what you saw? How he used Joseph to do it, and how that the life of the things that Joseph went through were horrible. Again, according to God's purpose. My point that I made earlier in Romans 8:28, it doesn't always feel good to us, but it is for our benefit. See it now? And that's what Paul said. We know this. How does Paul, and that's the whole point. When Paul said in Romans 8:28, we know, how did he know? By the Old Testament scriptures. He learned through the scriptures how God works in the life of his people. And that's when Paul refers to those who are the called. And that's why that definite article there in the Greek, not those who are called, but no, those who are the called. That means speaking for saved people, the elect. All right, but then, let me go. I promised you to bring some things to you. So, here's the thing. So, when we get to Genesis, we see that Joseph is sold into slavery, right? And then we get to this part about Genesis 38, and that's my teaching. And sometimes the scholars would say it's kind of confusing. Why did Moses throw this part in? It's kind of, it doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. And that's what I want. And I hope I haven't lost you guys in analyzing all of this stuff and putting together so much information so quickly. But I'm back to that original point where the scholars would say Genesis 38 seems to be out of place. And that's what they were saying. It seems that Moses put it out of place, and they don't understand exactly what is the purpose of Genesis 38. And it is so amazing that how are you confused by that? But just let me go on. Okay, so let me bring all these concepts together. So Joseph, chapter 37, right, is sent down into Egypt. He's sent down into Egypt. Here, in the back of my mind, there is an answer that I want to give to you guys, but I don't want to give it to you too quickly. So I'm taking my time so that I can bring out Genesis chapter 38. So here we go. So, why do we have chapter 38, right? And what does this have to do with God causing all things to work together for the good? And what does this have to do with Genesis chapter 37, the stuff that I brought in concerning Joseph? And remember, when we're in chapter 37, Joseph is sent down into Egypt. And this is why. So now let us begin. Man, isn't it really super late in this video? But let us begin in our study. I'm almost out of my 30-minute time, but I'm going to have to restart this. Chapter 38, and then we'll see some things. I may have to kind of broad stroke it, guys, but hopefully we'll get to an answer when we talk about God making things work for our good. Genesis 38, verse number 1. Let us start. It came about at that time that Judah departed from his brothers and visited a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite whose name was Shua, and he took her and went in to her. So she conceived and bore a son, and he named him Then she conceived again and bore a son and named him Onan. She bore still another son and named him Shelah, and it was Keseb that she bore him. All right, so let's talk about it. And I got to keep an eye on my time, guys. Remember that 30-minute clock. All right, so it starts and says Judah departed from his brothers. Okay, here's where you have to have a lot of Old Testament background. You got to remember how things work. All right. So, all right. I guess this is going to be a longer teaching than I thought, but let me say it as concise as I can. From Genesis chapter 12, God called Abraham, and that's when God began to choose a certain man. That is, he would work through the promised seed. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not doing a good job on this at all. Let me do it this way. Guys. Back it up. Ever since the failure of Adam, okay, that's when we see it kicking in. The failure of Adam in the Garden of Eden, that passage you hear me talk about all the time, the Genesis 3:15 passage. Ever since then, there was the promise of God to bring in the promised seed. You got it? And that is the seed of the woman. And we can see that seed being talked about. That's all of that stuff in Genesis chapter 5. The transmission. And that's why we trace the genealogy. We're not tracing the genealogy just for no reason. We're looking at the genealogy as we're looking for that seed that should come. Son of this man, son of that man, and son of that man. Now do you understand why we have the genealogies in the Bible? Because we're tracing the seed. God trying to bring, not so much trying to, God, he will bring, how he would bring in through these people this promised seed. The seed that we come to know as the Messiah. That is Jesus. So that's how we understand Jesus comes into the world. That's why when you get into the New Testament, book of Matthew, you can see it. In the book of Luke, you can see it. They trace the genealogies. Matthew traces the genealogy of the seed all the way to Abraham. Luke traces the genealogy of the seed all the way to Adam himself. Now do you understand what's going on? So it's all about tracing the genealogy of the seed, that is the Messiah. We know who will be what? Jesus himself. All right? So that's what's going on with all of that. And so he keeps tracing the genealogy all the way up till we get to the destruction of the world through Noah. And then that's again, we see another set of the genealogy of the seeds through the sons of Noah. Remember, Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And Japheth is the chosen seed line. And so what does he do? He continues to trace the genealogy of that promised seed line as we go all the way up to a man by the name of Terah, father of Abraham. Got it? And as you move through this whole issue concerning father of Abraham, and we set to Abraham himself, that's when God makes the promise, and he deals specifically with Abraham. It will be his family, his seed line, that race that should come from him, that God will continue to work through to bring the Messiah. You got it? So we have Abraham, and it all has to do with the promise of the seed, because that's what God actually did in Genesis 3:15. He made a promise. So when you go and work through that, Abraham, and notice, it's not all the children of Abraham, only those of the promise. Abraham, because remember, Abraham had what? Ishmael was his first son, but he wasn't chosen. It was Isaac. And even after Abraham had Isaac as a son, he further had other sons, 5 or 6, from Keturah, his other wife, that once Sarah died. But notice, they are not the sons of promise. So notice, from Abraham to Isaac, and then Isaac, and notice, remember the twin sons, Jacob and Esau, but Esau was not the son of what? Promise. It was whom? It was Jacob. And now therefore Jacob. That means these are the ones through whom the seed will come. You understand that? And now, here's the thing that you need to see. Once Jacob is born, okay, once Jacob is born, then now we're dealing with all of the children of Jacob. And these are Jews, all the sons of Jacob, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So once you get to Jacob's line, everybody who comes from Jacob, all the males, they're Jews. And that's the biblical point. All right. Now, once you get through Jacob, now we find this out much later in the scriptures from where we are in Genesis chapter 38. But the whole point is this. And actually, if you want to know where it is, it's in Genesis chapter 49, when Jacob is on his deathbed. He speaks of the prophets he speaks of the coming one from whom that he refers to as until Shiloh comes. That just simply is a prophetic utterance that the Messiah, the seed, should come from Judah, Jacob's fourth son. You got it? Judah, Jacob's fourth. So the Messiah should come from Judah. Maybe I'm kind of glad I told you guys about that, because it'll help you understand when we get back to the Genesis 38 passage even better. You got it? So, but anyway, the point is, in chapter 49, he gives the prophecy that the seed should come through his son, Judah, the Messiah. Jesus would come. Remember, Jesus is the son of what? Judah. Got it? Okay. And so this is what's going on here. So the seed line, and that's what I've been doing for you guys. The seed line is being traced, and therefore God is preserving the seed line. Now, I said all of that in this whole point, and so I can get back to this. So, because I'm covering a lot of material for you guys without actually reading all these passages, because you would literally have to read and study the whole book of Genesis. So we're putting all this stuff in a nutshell and explaining it. I'm just delivering it all to you. Okay, so what happens is this. So when we get to Genesis chapter 12, I'm kind of having a little fun with it. So when we get to Genesis chapter 12, there is Abraham, right? Okay. But also too, developing alongside of the family of Abraham that is to come from Abraham is also the Canaanites. You remember that? And I don't want to even take you back to the stuff, but it's a beautiful thing. But just let me tell you anyway, just to make your mind remember. Remember when you had one of the sons of Noah went in and saw him naked? Remember that? It was son Ham. And Ham saw his father naked. And when he did that, Noah cursed his son. And the curse of Noah was not so much, and that's the thing about it. And I talked about that in an earlier video. But since I'm here and I feel like taking my time, what the heck? And Noah cursed his son Ham. The curse, it didn't mean he cussed him out. It simply means that was a prophetic utterance, and it was a negative revelation concerning the descendants of Ham. And notice what he said. It was Ham who actually did the sin and seeing Noah naked. But Noah said what? Cursed be Canaan. Isn't that amazing? And most people never think about that. Canaan is the son of Noah. Canaan is also the father of the Canaanites, and that's what you got to see. So put that together. You got it? Put it together. The father of the Canaanites. And the whole issue behind the curse is, and it basically was a derivative of the actions of Ham. Ham's action concerning looking at his father was a sexual immorally and debased action. And so therefore what Noah was done, he was given that revelation concerning the descendants of Ham, namely the descendants of Canaan, that they themselves would be people who were sexually immoral and debased. They would do a lot of sexually debased things. You got it? Okay, that's the thing. And that's why, and I guess I'll throw this nugget in there too. When you see the children of Israel coming into the land of Canaan after all this stuff of being delivered by the hand of Moses, over 400 years later, that's why God wrote Leviticus chapters 18 and Leviticus chapter 20. And he talked about the immoral conduct of the inhabitants of the land of Canaan. It all stems, cursed be Canaan. The whole issue that God knew that these people would be sexually immoral. You got that? So that's important in understanding that. So now let me keep bringing you on down. So they developed these. So you got Abraham and his descendants, the Jewish people, and God's revelation to them of who he was. They have the revelation that Yahweh is the true God. You got it? And of course, what happens with the other generations that descended from Canaan? They departed from that revelation of Yahweh. They once knew it, because you got to remember, Shem, Ham, and Japheth are the sons of Noah. And they were all on the boat with Noah as those who knew God. You got it? Whether or not they were in Noah, we know was righteous men. But the point is, they knew Yahweh was the true God. But what happened with the descendants of Ham, who later on became Canaanites, and here's where you get the Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites. See there? All of these descendants of Ham, the Canaanites, they departed from the true God. And what happened as they began to fall into idolatrous worship, all the kind of immoral practices went along with it. So what happens is, you'll see many times, remember when Abraham got ready to find a wife for his son Isaac, remember what he told his servant to do? Do not go to these Canaanites. Remember that? And notice even once again, and it's a beautiful point again. When Jacob, you remember Jacob's son, he did not want, he didn't want his son to marry one of the Canaanites. And so oftentimes you would see the Jewish patriarchs, whenever they would, okay, there we go. And what was in my mind was Isaac. It was in my mind Isaac. And so we would see it again. And the whole point is this. Do you remember when you had Jacob and Esau? And Esau married one of the Canaanite women, how it displeased his mother and his father, and how they sent Jacob to their father, to their relative's house. But the whole point is this: don't marry the Canaanites. And we constantly see that whole issue. Whatever you do, do not marry any of the descendants of the Canaanites. And there are two basic reasons for this. Number one, the Canaanites weren't serving the true God. They didn't have a knowledge of the true God, that is Yahweh. And number two, because of their failure to have a knowledge of the true God, they often indulge in immoral behavior, sexually immoral behavior. Now, I went all the way around the world. I gave you guys a ton of information. How much, I don't know, you'll remember. But that's what's important to understand, what the blazes is actually going on. All right? So let me go all the way back to our Genesis 38 passage, because that's what we're trying to study. And I'm trying to show you why that when Moses inserted this, it made perfect sense. And the whole thing, what we came about, all things working together for the good of those who love the Lord. Showing you why God did what he did and why it was a benefit for the children of Israel. And what do let me just get to the passage so we can bring this to a close and make this less than an hour. What we just read was that Judah departed from his brothers. Now here's the whole thing. He departed from his brothers, and he met this particular man that they call a certain Adulamite by the name of Hira among the Canaanites. Here is the point. The problem is Judah has left his brother. It's because you got to think tribal in that, guys. So you got Jacob and his sons, and they basically all lived together. It was God's mind. I guess I'll throw this into, it's gonna be nugget after nugget after nugget. It was the mind of God and the will of God. It was the determined. That's why I did the Genesis chapter 12 thing. God intended for the Jews to be a separate people. He was going to bring salvation through the Jews, but nevertheless, you have to keep that in mind. Let that go into your spirit. It was God's intention for the Jews to be a separate people, which is one of the reasons when God says that the Jews should sanctify themselves and be holy. His whole point, God's whole point when he made the statement, is to be separate from the Gentiles. That's all that statement is meaning. Being separate from the Gentiles for the purpose and usage of God. Right? God causes all things to work together for the good to those who are called according to what? God's purposes. So it was God's intention for the Jews to be a separate people. And thinking tribally, Judah, instead of him remaining with his people, he gets the bright idea to leave his people. And where is Judah? Judah has now separated from Jacob, the tribe, and now he's over there fooling around with the Canaanites. And remember all that stuff that I told you about the Canaanites. Remember all that stuff that I told you about the Canaanites, because it's going to come to play, and we'll see what's going on. And what does he do? Notice it said he saw a particular woman a Canaanite. So the woman was a Canaanite, the daughter of Shua. And Second Chronicles says that her name was Bathshua. All the writer was doing was using two Hebrew words. Bath is the Hebrew word for daughter, and Shua. So he just simply made it a proper name. Daughter of Shua. That's what Bathshua is. Her name was not Bathshua. And here's a point. You know what? I don't care. I don't even care anymore, guys. As long as you learn some things. Okay? What you see in the text is this. God don't like what's going on here. You got it? Judah has left his brothers, married this Canaanite woman, and God is so indignant about it, he decides not to even name her. So we don't even have the slightest idea of what the woman's name is. And so it's the scripture's way of looking down and saying, by daughter of Shua. That's who he married. Because God didn't like what Judah did. That's what's going on. All right, but let me go on. So he married her, and so remember, he married a Canaanite. He left his brothers? Wrong. Married a Canaanite? Wrong. What did they always do all the time? Don't marry the Canaanite. Why? The Canaanites don't know who the true God is. That's number one. And number two, remember, the Canaanites are the descendants of whom? Ham. So tell me about their conduct. It's very sexually immoral people. And you're going to see this play out. So he married the woman, and he had three sons. What was it? Onan, and Shelah. And was his oldest son. So now let's watch this. And I'm going to, a lot of things that you may never have understood what was going on. We'll talk about it. What the heck today? Okay, now let's look at verse number 6. Now Judah took a wife for It was very common for the men to take wives for their sons. He took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. And she also is a Canaanite. She is also a Canaanite woman. All right? Okay. But Judah's firstborn, was evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord took his life. All right. So now, there is the Bible doesn't say what did. But the whole point is that, now here's what you got to see. You got to kind of understand the nature of what the scripture is trying to do. And I'm gonna just go ahead and give you the answers, so we don't try to worry about it. Let me just give you the answer. You got these Canaanites. So you got Judah, a Jewish man who knows the true God. So he's going to try to live. They don't have, according to that revealed knowledge of God. And that's the whole point. God has revealed himself to the descendants of Abraham, and Judah is one of those descendants. You got it? And so therefore, to some degree, he has a higher conscience of God, and that means the stat. When I say, I'm trying not to use the word statutes, but the bottom line is this: Judah knows the right and the wrong. He has an idea, a greater understanding of how God wants you to live, or in other words, the holiness of God. But unlike these Canaanites, remember, they've departed from the true God. And guess how they live? However they want. And a lot of times in their debased system of idol worship, remember that. In their debased system of idol worship, they practice worshiping their gods through sexual immorality. That, in other words, they were literally, let me just say it in a way that you'll get it. When they came to church and they were worshiping their gods, they worshiped them by having sex. And sometimes they would try to titillate the worship because their gods were fertility gods. That's what you'll see, and that's another subject. And so that's what you see all that sexuality was about. Trying to excite the gods, because if they excite their idol gods would make their crops, that when it came time for the harvesting of crops, it would make it more bountifully. So they would do things in order to excite the gods. And how would they excite the gods? By them having sex. And that's why they often had temple prostitutes, or in other words, women in these idol temples who would have sex with the men. You got it? So this was wild. Anyway, okay, that's enough of that. Let's get back to the point. But these are the Canaanites. Now do you understand what's going on out there in this world? And Judah has went out there, married one of those women, had 3 kids, and his first son, that's where I am now. So he says he was evil. So here's the deal. So it doesn't tell us exactly what he did, but this is what I went through all that other stuff to tell you. Instead of, and you have to see it. So let me answer time. Instead of Judah influencing his sons, instead of him influencing those boys in the way of righteousness after the true God, those boys are being more influenced from their Canaanite mother. Remember, the daughter of she's a Canaanite. Remember all that stuff I tell you about the Canaanite? They are being influenced by her. And not only are they being influenced, and that's the way it commonly works with children. Children, what the heck? The weaker parent, the more permissive parent, that's the one usually whom the children gravitate towards. And here we see the sons of Judah gravitating toward the mindset, the morality of their mother, their Canaanite mother. And what do? Whatever the deal is, you got to think about what's going on in the scripture. Is so wicked. How do you get so wicked that God just decided to kill you? But he was. So who is he learning from? Is he learning from the side of Judah, who served God, the true and living God, or is he learning from the Canaanites? That's clearly the Canaanites. Just remember that. And I'm going to bring it to a close. I'm running out of time. Too much. Let's go on. Then Judah, verse number 8. He said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform your duty as a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So when he went into his brother's wife, he wasted his seed on the ground in order not to give offspring to his brother. But what he did was displeasing in the sight of the Lord. So God, he took his life, he killed him too. Okay, so let me get to it. So what happened? Here's the system. So even before Moses in the law, the Levirate marriage, that's what he's talking about. That is, when your brother dies, remember God killed So married Tamar, but he didn't have a child yet. And so it was a custom, even before the time of Moses, that the brother would take his wife, would take the dead brother's wife, and he would have sexual relations with his dead brother's wife long enough that she would get pregnant and then stop. That's what you got to see. Have sex with her and just long enough for her to get pregnant. And once she gets pregnant, don't have sex with her no more, because the child that she would be pregnant with, even though it's your baby, the baby is to be called by the name of your dead brother. You got it? And so this is what's going on. Onan knew that once Tamar got pregnant, the child would not be called by Onan. Wouldn't be called by Onan, but the child would be called by the name of his dead brother. It would be considered his brother's child. And he didn't like that, right? But notice, now here's the point. So here's what the question you got to ask yourself. Why did God kill him? Why did God kill him? Onan had no desire for the child to be called by the name of his dead brother. Now, if you didn't want that child to be called by your dead brother, by his name, then you should not have had sex with your dead brother's wife. So what was the problem? What was the sin of Onan? The sin of Onan, because note, what did he do? He spilled his seed. He spilled it. Well, y'all know, I hope y'all know what that means. That means once it came time for his ejaculation, he pulled out. So he didn't want to get her pregnant. Now, if you didn't want to get her pregnant, you should not have been having sex with your brother's wife. And I know he's dead, but that's the whole issue. You shouldn't be having sex with her. So what is the whole thing? Onan wants to enjoy the sexual pleasure with his brother's wife, but he doesn't want to do the right thing and bring out a name for his brother. So therefore, guess what? If you ain't gonna give seed to the woman, stop enjoying the sex with the woman. All Onan wanted to do was enjoy the sex, and therefore God killed him. So what is the point that I'm trying to bring? Notice once again, what can you see? Who is Judah's son taken after? Are they taken after Judah? And it's a mess. It's a mess. It's a mess. Are they taken after Judah, or are they taken after their Canaanite mother, with the way that the Canaanites think and the sexual and moral practices of the Canaanite? All right, now let's finish it. And I think, guys, I'm just going to get ready. I may have to just walk you through it anyway. Just may have to walk you through it without reading it all. I tell you what, how about I do it that way? This is almost an hour long. So what happens? Judah looks at Tamar and he doesn't feel too good about what's taking place. And he says, he starts saying, this is a black widow. Every time I send a son to her, he ends up dead. And so Judah promises that once his younger son, Shelah, gets of age, he promises Tamar that he would give him to her as a husband, so he can go and do the same thing that Onan has done. But the truth of the matter is, Judah has no intent of giving his son to Tamar so that she can get the baby by him. So once his son got of age, she was kind of watching that and noticing that Judah failed to do what he had promised to do, because he had told Tamar, you go home and you put on your widow's clothing. In other words, don't you marry, and you can't fool with none other man. So this woman can't have no husband, no nothing, until Shelah is of age. So she got to literally wait. And then all of this takes place. But the point is, gets to be a man, and it's time for him to do that. Judah fails to give his son to Tamar, so Tamar concocts a plan on her own. And instead of her waiting on she decides to get pregnant by Judah himself. But now watch this now. So the passage of time comes, and I wish I had time, guys, to walk you through the scriptures just so you can see the punch power of it. Judah's wife is dead. That's the thing. His wife is what? Dead. All right. And so it's time for the shearing. It's time for the shearing to come. That's when you get together and all these people get together and shearing the sheep and all this kind of stuff like this. And so Judah is on his way to get involved in one of the festivals and amongst the Canaanites. And Tamar takes off her widow clothes and stands on the side of the road dressed like a harlot, because it's the sheep shearing time. And remember, one of the things that the Canaanites would commonly do when you want to, the gods, notice not the true God now, the gods, to bless you. How do you stimulate the gods? With sexual immoral activity. You got it? So Tamar takes off her widow clothes and she puts on the clothes of a prostitute. But you got to understand what kind of it ain't just a regular prostitute. It's one of those idol god prostitutes. You got it? It's a beautiful thing. Idol god prostitutes. Judah going down the road and he sees her. He doesn't even realize that that's his daughter-in-law. But all of a sudden, what does Judah do? He engages Tamar. What would you give me? I ain't gonna tell y'all what just went through my mind. What would you give me for a little bit? Oh. But he propositions Tamar. Asks her what you give him for it, right? And so she gives him a price. Judah didn't have any money on him. And she gives him, he gives her his signet. And these are personally identifiable things. His signet, his staff, and his seal, right? And his cord. Signet, staff, and his cord. These things that can easily identify that it's Judah. And okay, I don't want to run by it, guys, because I figure the signet is kind of like a special little signet ring. Not necessarily a ring. It could be a bracelet or something like that. But it's something that when Judah stamps it, you know that it is Judah. It's personally identifiable. That's what I mean by that. But that's what, since Judah doesn't have any money, he gives that, and these things are valuable. He gives it to Tamar. So you hold that, and I'll send my money back to you later on, and then I'll get my personal items back from you. So Judah, but now here's the thing that you got to see. The scripture's not going into all of the details. As Tamar is dressed as a temple prostitute, right? So what is Judah doing? Judah is engaging in idolatrous worship by getting them, and think about what Judah doing. He's having sex because he ain't married. He's having sex to stimulate a foreign god. You don't, and don't think about it because he doesn't know that's his daughter-in-law. But the whole point is this: Judah is engaged in idolatrous worship. Judah, you're supposed to be worshiping the true and living God. And what are you doing? Even though Judah may not so much be trying to worship an idol god, but that is what he's doing, because what does Tamar represent? She represents a temple prostitute. And so therefore Judah is engaging in these things. And that's why you'll see, let me tell you what's going on now. When God says to the children of Israel, I'm taking you guys on up down the road now. He says, when you get into the land of Egypt, into the land of Canaan, don't marry those folk and don't give your sons to marry. He says, why? Because they're going to turn your heart from following after the true and living God. They're going to turn the heart of your sons and your daughters to following after their idols. That's exactly what's taking place here with Judah. Even though he may be after a little poo-tang, in reality, he is being turned away from the true and living God. And he's using this sexual immoral conduct. Okay, guys, I don't know. It stopped again. I don't know where it stopped at. But the whole point is, we see that Judah is turning away from it. So let me go on to it. So what happened? I'm gonna bring it all to a close. I got to bring it all to a close. I think this thing is going over an hour. So Judah ends up having an immoral relationship with his daughter, daughter-in-law, Tamar, right? And later on, she sends back for the stuff. We know Judah sends back to get his stuff, and Tamar is smart. She keeps that stuff. And Judah, in order to avoid any embarrassment, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Let her keep it or whatever. And later on, about 3 months later, he finds out Tamar is pregnant. And then when he finds out Tamar is pregnant, he's indignant and angry. And bring her out and burn her. He literally said that. Bring her out and let her be burned. And when she got ready to be burned, she remembered Tamar kept his signet ring, his cord, and his staff, personal identifiable items. And she said to Judah, she said, the man that I'm pregnant by, this is his stuff. When Judah saw it, he realized that was his stuff. And he said she was more righteous than I. And that's almost rhetorical in a way. She's more righteous than I. You know what? I'm going to deal with that just for a little bit. And I know I'm way out of time. Yeah, she more righteous than you. You fooler, you left your brothers, married a Canaanite. They have departed from the living God, and they are in the ways of the Canaanite. 2 of your sons were so wicked learning that instead of learning from you about the true God, they're learning from their Canaanite mother. 2 of your sons were so wicked, they got killed by God himself. You were scared to give the 3rd son away. Then you turn around in idolatrous worship. You get involved in idolatrous worship, sleeping with your daughter-in-law, and you mean to say she's more righteous than you are? It's an absolute. Now, it's a mess. It's a mess. And Tamar gets pregnant. We already know she has Pharez and Zerah. Those were the sons. But the whole point, and again, it is Pharez, because Jesus has come from Pharez. So the line of the Messiah is continued through Pharez. But let me tell you what the point is. That's why I stopped there. I wanted to put the notation with Pharez. Pharez. When you trace the history of the Messiah, remember all that stuff that I told you all about an hour ago concerning the Messianic line? Here's the whole thing that you got to remember. Judah, remember I told you guys about Genesis chapter 49? Judah is the chosen one of God for the continuation of the Messianic seed. You got it? That was already known in the mind of God. That was selected in God's mind when Judah was born, 4th son from Jacob. You got it? On the day that Judah was conceived, it was God's determination he would be the one. What happened? Judah leaves his brother, the Genesis chapter 38. Now I'm trying to tie back on what's going on. Why did Moses include Genesis 38? And why were they saying it doesn't belong there? Oh, it belongs there, all right. And I'm going to tie it to Genesis 37. And I'm going to tie it to all things work together. Judah was the chosen seed. He left his brothers. He got tied up with the Canaanites. And notice what's going on. Judah is the one through whom the seed would come. The seed is becoming corrupt. You see it now? The seed is becoming corrupt. Remember the 2 ways again? So play this video again and again. The Canaanites neither serve the true and living God. That's number 1. And number 2, remember the immoral conduct. Cursed be Canaan. The sexual immoral conduct. And notice that's what we see in the sons of Judah and Judah himself. So guess what's now going to become of the seed? Here's the whole point. What is going to become of the seed? If God would allow this, okay, let's let Judah stay. Keep doing what you're doing, Judah. Then let the Jewish people, and remember, it's coming through Judah. The seed is coming through Judah. So we see his sons, right? And we see the mess that's becoming. And let's look at Judah. We see the mess that's becoming of Judah himself, the conduct from Judah. What will become of the seed? Number one, it will pollute it. Pollute it with all of these Canaanites. That's number one. And number two, and most important of all, they will soon lose the knowledge of the true God. Why? It is already clear in Genesis 38 when you look at the conduct of Judah. Remember what he thought Tamar was. He thought she was a temple prostitute. That means a prostitute to one of the idol gods, probably Baal or Ashtaroth, one of those ancient names for them. Probably one of them. So what is the whole thing? We can already see Judah beginning to go into idol worship. And who is Judah again? He is the one through whom the Messiah should come. So therefore the seed line is becoming corrupt. And if it continues, so here's the end of the whole lesson. If it is allowed to continue in this fashion, the Jewish family, remember God chose the Jewish people to bring in the Messiah. It was God's intended for the Jewish people to be a singular and distinct people from among the Gentiles, not to mix with them. This is gone. That's the whole point that I'm trying to teach you. All of this is gone, but the most important thing is the seed line is corrupted. Now let me bring it back to you. So watch this. So here is the wisdom of God. Remember I told you how sometimes it doesn't feel good and it gets rough on you, but God is working all things according to his purpose. God intends to use the Jewish people, you got it, as a singular and distinct people. And God also intends to bring the seed line through Judah, uncorrupted by these Canaanites. You got it? So what does God do? Now back up. Now here is the wisdom. Oh, it's rough on Joseph. Why did these things happen to Joseph? Why did God do this thing to Joseph? I'm going to bring it all to you guys. Now we see why God sent Joseph. See, Joseph wasn't just mistreated by his brothers and ended up in Egypt. God sent Joseph to Egypt. Why? So that, here is the whole point. When God sent Joseph into Egypt, God himself would later send a famine. What would the famine do? Remember, see, that's why you got to know your Old Testament. Jacob and his sons, they ran out of food. So they had to go down into Egypt, the only place where there was food left. Why was there food left? Because Joseph, the one who God sent, Genesis chapter 37, Joseph had the wisdom to store up all these treasure troves of food in Egypt because God had given a dream to Pharaoh. And Joseph had the gift of interpretation. See how my whole point is this. All you got to do is think about it. All these things are doing what? Romans 8 and 28. Working together. Working together. Joseph has the interpretation of dreams. Who gave him the interpretation of dreams? God. Why did he do that? Because God was going to give Pharaoh a dream that there was coming a famine. And why is God doing that? Because God is going to send a famine to drive the sons of Jacob. And who are the sons of Jacob? Judah is one of them. I'm going so fast, but that's okay, guys, because I'm putting it all together. He's going to send a famine into the land of Canaan, into the promised land. This will drive Jacob to send his sons to Egypt to search for food. And what happens in the finality? Joseph brings Jacob and all of his brothers, all of the family of the Israelites. He brings them all into Egypt, into Goshen. I'm going to help you out. I'm going to help you out. It's long, but you'll appreciate it. And remember, the Israelites herded sheep. this was considered an abomination. Sheep herding was considered an abomination to the Egyptians. And therefore the Egyptians don't want what? They don't want the Jews to mingle with them because they're considered them an abomination. And therefore they want the Jews to go into their own separate land away from the Egyptians into the land of Goshen. But wait a minute, think about what I just said. The Egyptians, abomination, they don't want the Jews, send the Jews away. And what would happen? Send them away to and by themselves. What was the mindset of God? What did I tell you that God wanted from the first place? He wanted the Jews to be a separate and distinct people. Remember that? He also wanted the Jews to raise up into a nation of people without the contamination of the Gentiles, especially the Canaanites. So guess what God engineered? What he engineered? God engineered the famine in order to drive the Jewish people into Egypt, knowing the Egyptians don't like sheep herders, that they would send the Jewish people into a separate place for themselves. And so that the Jewish people would end up alone like God wanted them to be. And guess who they would really, and the whole idea, they would be remembering to worship the true and living God, because they would not be contaminated with all of these idol gods of the Gentiles. You got it? So here's the point. So I guess I'm going to bring it home with this final. Here's how it all works out. Because we started with this whole issue. God causes. Remember that? God causes all things to work together for the good of those who love the Lord, to those who are the called. That's who those Jews were. That's who Judah is, the promised seed line, the called. Those who are the called of God according to what? God's purposes. What is my whole point? Finally bringing it to a close. Sometimes things don't feel good. Things don't work good, blah, 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 tweet, tweet, tweet. And you kind of wonder, well, is God involved in all of these things? It doesn't feel good for us. And that's Paul's whole point. You can rest assured, what? No matter what's going on, if you do belong to God, if you indeed, just like Judah, just like Jacob, just like if you belong to God, no matter what's taking place in your life, even if it doesn't feel good, even if it, remember, and that's the Genesis 37. Joseph, in other words, Joseph. Remember all the crap that happened to Joseph. It didn't feel good. But guess what? It was for the good of the Israelite people, and it served, that's my whole point in all of this, it served to the purpose of God. What did Paul say? All things work together for the good of those who love the Lord, to those who are the called, that's us, for the purposes of God. So you can also rest assured that no matter what is taking place in your life, the all-knowing, the all-seeing God, that he uses even the bad stuff in your life to work together for your good. And I hope you guys learned something from all of that. Catch you next time.